Welcome to this presentation. My name is Agnes Stancel Piątak. I am working at the IEA DPC in Hamburg. Today's presentation is on the cross-country comparisons of school effectiveness, and I will present to you some empirical applications of the dynamic model of educational effectiveness. In order to give you a deeper understanding on this research, I would introduce to you school effectiveness research at the beginning of the presentation, and also give you some thoughts to the role of the organizational theories in SER. Then we will take a look on some models from school effectiveness research and take a little bit deeper look into the school in the social ecological perspective. Furthermore, I would like to present to you the dynamic model of educational effectiveness and also present to you some concepts on conceptualizing the evaluation of schools. And the second part of the presentation is on critical rethinking, namely in a more general terms, what is important for learning. And at the end of the presentation, I would like to present to you my empirical example from my own research, which is on school management and leadership. So first of all, let us start with a short introduction to school effectiveness research. So what is school effectiveness research? It describes a research field which is concerned with the effectiveness of schools, of course, and it started to develop in the US in early 60s. Recently, school effectiveness research is a well-established research area with studies in different educational systems worldwide. And interestingly, large-scale assessment studies in all areas of school system, from early childhood education to high school education, are often based on the input-process-output paradigm. And this paradigm is at the core of SER. So to understand the recent discussions on quality and effectiveness, it is important to consider also the historical perspective and how school effectiveness research developed. So we can differentiate four main stages, starting in early 60s and continuing until now. And in the first stage, the dominating perspective was on input-output models, and I will explain in a minute what this means exactly. At the second stage, the dominating perspective was on learning processes in the classroom. The third stage is dominated by effective schools research, and this will be explained in a minute as well. And at the fourth stage, in the late 80s until now, the socio-ecological perspective was very important and prominent in school effectiveness research. So the first stage, the focus on input-output models was on potential effects of schools' human and material resources as input factors on school term outputs. And the school term output, short-term outputs were mainly students' achievement. And the method to analyze this were linear input-output models, and as you see, the process of the learning process, which is at the core of education, was missing in that models. And there was this famous study of Kuhlman where he stated school doesn't matter. And the effect of family factors in this study were found to have a much higher and greater impact on student outcomes than any school factors. Of course, this study and also other studies that applied this paradigm were criticized. There were some methodological considerations, and it was stated this would lead to biased parameter estimates, and this will be clear when I explain later on also the developments. Also, it was criticized that social and psychological classroom factors were neglected in the first studies, and the school effects were underestimated. And as I mentioned before, no process characteristics were considered, and these models were criticized as a kind of black box where you put something in, then something happens inside, nobody knows what, and then something else comes out. So at the second stage, therefore, it was there were efforts to consider the school processes and the learning processes, and also to consider different types of outcomes, not only student achievement, but also personality traits that are related to learning, and social competencies, for example, attitudes and behavioral patterns. So the goal was to explain school achievement on the class level with specific teacher traits as well as with factors on the school level, so to consider both levels of the system. Important school factors that has been found in that stage were leadership styles, expectations, school climate, sensitive evaluation processes of learning development of students. The methodological developments at that stage were starting from case studies, but later they became also more quantitative studies. There were also a development of more subtle measurement instruments of the family background, such as socioeconomic status, cultural capital, etc. Another development is the development of socio-psychological scales to assess processes and stronger differentiation of outcomes. Also analysis of relationships between different levels of the school system, which I mentioned before, the school, classroom, and individual level. At the third stage, there was this effective school research emerging, and the analysis focus was the integration of the correlational results from effective school research in a series of different school development programs. And they found also some important school factors within this time period, such as leadership styles of the principals, steady and comprehensive focus on the quality of instruction, security and order as a climate variable, high expectations of achievement from students, and use of school achievement tests for evaluation optimization. This is also a time period where first studies within the paradigm of social inequality were applied. However, they were criticized due to this ideal of equality, and also due to some methodological criticism, which could lead to bias in the parameter estimates. At the beginning, they started with correlative associations, and later on, they proceeded with sophisticated approaches. So the fourth stage until now is very much under the influence of the socio-ecological perspective, and the school effects are analyzed within different environmental conditions with comprehensive models, with diverse student outcomes, and with sophisticated methods. And I will explain and explore it a little bit later on. To have a wider understanding over the structure of school effectiveness research, I would like to present to you some research branches that occurred. They result from different research traditions, as you will see in a minute. So the first one is the school effects research. I mean, the naming conventions are very similar, however, they really differ in terms of methods and analysis focus. So the school effects research was the very early branch which was focused on input-output models using more quantitative approaches and analyzing short-term outputs in relation to inputs on the level of the organization. So they included mainly school-level factors. The effective school research was the one research branch that started to include process variables into the models, starting with more qualitative studies and proceeding with quantitative studies as well later on. The school improvement research analyzed school processes related to changes over time, and then there was some moving around with these branches. So at a later time point, school effects research and school improvement research were merged together into school effectiveness research. And school effects research and effective school research were merged together into educational effectiveness research. And this educational effectiveness research, the assumption was that school factors are kind of cumulative factors. So it doesn't make sense to separate school factors to analyze student achievement, because it can lead to the underestimation or wrong conclusions. And this is easy to imagine when you think about, for example, improving just one single factor of learning, like let's say the time on task, without considering any other factors such as the quality or class climate or anything else. Then of course, even though you would increase it significantly, it can, the effect on student outcomes may be really negligible. So the unexplored research questions that remained within this research branch and were not answered was, for example, the question if school effects influence student achievement directly or if they act as mediators or moderators. That was an unexplored question. Also, it was not clear if the association are reciprocal or unidirectional. So what happened afterwards as recent developments is that all these three branches are merged together recently in school effectiveness research, and I will present to you the sophisticated and comprehensive models, and you will see how those different perspectives are really included into these models. So the prominent approaches in recent studies on school effectiveness is the ecological perspective, input, process, output, and cognitive approach to learning. And the aim is to analyze learning processes, to consider cognitive processes, and also the underlying assumption is that these factors, school factors, are depending from each other and influencing each other. An important contribution of the ecological perspective is also the consideration of this micro, meso, and macro level of the system. Then there was the influence of the social cognitive theory into school effectiveness research, which is based on the assumption that individual personal traits are interacting with factors of the environment. And of course, it is implying this reciprocal association of the outcomes and environment. So the effects of inputs on outcomes was unidirectional in previous models, but now the perspective shifted a little bit, and the assumption was that this influence is reciprocal. Empirically, of course, these assumptions require longitudinal studies. So that is the reason why at the beginning there were mainly experimental or semi-experimental designs, but later on also applications in large-scale assessments followed. Also, one of the developments in this new perspective is the shift considering the discussion on social inequality, namely this ideal of equality of opportunity was very much criticized as being unrealistic, and the discussion started to shift towards justice of opportunity. So the school effectiveness was no longer defined as equal results for all children, but as equitable opportunities for all children. And instead of school rankings, with unadjusted models, the school rankings started to use adjusted models, which was also subsumed under this term value-added models or fair comparisons of schools from different social contexts. This means basically that the models were not just considering student outcomes, and you have this school rankings without any controlling for any contextual variables. But this means that school rankings were now implemented while controlling for contextual variables. So this gives us a more precise picture about the school effectiveness, basically, because of course a school which is allocated in a poorer area has to deal with much more challenges. So the school can be very effective in terms of effectiveness, but you wouldn't see it while analyzing just purely outcomes without considering the context, right? So the criterion was how much is a school able to adapt to the environmental conditions and to meet the needs of its clients achieving various goals. So now I would like to present to you the contribution of the organizational theories in school effectiveness research. The organizational theories are based on an economical approach to school quality, where school is considered as a kind of company, and learning processes are called production processes and student outcomes products. So this is the terminology from this research branch. Definitions of school effectiveness, this can be defined as the degree to which the production process achieves specific goals, taking into account the input. And this is a definition which doesn't depend on the costs. However, there was also this nice term, school efficacy, very much criticized also at the beginning of school effectiveness research, that considered also the costs. But I mean, when you really think in practical terms, of course, costs are also a factor that has to be taken into account while developing, let's say, policy recommendations and things related to that. So to understand the focus of school effectiveness research, we have to think about school functions. And of course, we can classify school functions in different ways. This is one proposed classification by Cheng. And as you see, the classification contains technical, economic, human, social outcomes, political, cultural, and educational function. And I mean, I will not go into detail with that because I just wanted to point out that school effectiveness research focuses on just two of these 5 different functions. I mean, in practical terms, in empirical studies, you will find most of them being focused on those 2 first functions. And of particular interest in this context are student outputs, also called short-term outputs, which are defined as achievements or skills of students at the end of schooling. And this is, can be understood as technical or economic function of school. However, all 5 functions can have short-term and long-term outputs, right? But in the recent school effectiveness research, the focus is on the short-term output, considering the function, technical function of the school. Another focus is on the outcomes, which are also considered as long-term outputs related to social or cultural effectiveness or efficacy. And it's defined as a long-term results of schooling, for example, participation in a working space, social race, and fall. One very important contribution from the organizational theories from recent models is the dynamic perspective on school effectiveness. And the assumption is that organizations act goal-oriented and rational. So they are considered as a kind of living creature that has his own rationality. And of course, it is considered that school has different pressures from multiple and conflicting environmental constraints and constituencies in the process of pursuing multiple goals. So this just basically describes the recent situation of schools. A school is acting within a special social field with diverse social actors, and of course every group has different interests. Like the teachers has other interests, the parents have other interests, the society has his own interests, the economy has interests. Those diverse pressures where a school has to act. And another thing that is very specific to the school as organization are those unbalanced pressures, namely the pressure from ineffectiveness of achieving particular goals grows with the emphasis on a particular goal and the amount of resources and efforts allocated to them. So for example, when a school is ineffective in achievement and this produces a very high pressure on a school due to the importance of academic achievement in public examinations. So those are the mechanisms underlying or defining the situation of school. So this leads to the fact that a school has to choose priorities. Of course, they have to act with limited resources, and they have to put priorities on how to use limited resources and on the effectiveness criteria to be maximized. So the school cannot go for all the different quality and effectiveness criteria and improve on everything. So they have to put focus on different particular things. And they might vary throughout the time and also, of course, across circumstances. But this definition matches very good the empirical situation. However, it is challenging for empirical studies. because school effectiveness can be conceptualized according to this dynamic approach as the extent to which a school can adapt to the internal and external constraints and achieve multiple goals in the long run. So, of course, short-term information like cross-sectional studies might be irrelevant or misleading because school might be effective on some criteria but ineffective on others at a particular point in time due to prioritization of particular goals. However, there are some overlapping effectiveness criteria that can be derived from this dynamic approach, namely, for example, the awareness of a school of the unbalanced situation. Right, so the approach would be to go to the school and to assess how much awareness the principals, the teachers, the leadership has on the current situation of the student composition, of their daily life, etc., of their needs. Also, the adaptability and flexibility to set up a new priority goals can be defined as a quality criteria. The dynamic equilibrium among the multiple and conflicting pressures, and also strategies like strategic and school-based management or development planning. And there is one model that has been developed in more recent theoretical approaches, which is called total management model. And this is a holistic perspective of the dynamic processes towards school effectiveness. So to distinguish elements and aspects of the functioning, Mintzberg proposed the following categories. So the aim of this categorization is to have like a template or a schedule to specify particular areas of schooling that can be influenced and manipulated by school policy, of course. So the first are the goals of the organization. Then there's the structure that can be analyzed, the structure of positions, subunits, and also, of course, structure of positions, of procedures, sorry. The third area is the culture and communication and environment, and the communication is also related to the structure, so those areas are, of course, overlapping and depending from each other. And the fourth area is the primary process, and this is this organizational term for learning processes in the classroom. So now let us take a look on the models so that we have a more concrete idea how those analyses were implemented and operationalized. So this is the integrated model of school effectiveness. First of all, let us consider that those levels are included into the model that I mentioned before. So we have the school level, we have the classroom level, and we have the student level in the model. But also we have a context level. And when we take a closer look at the process, so this is this middle part of the model, with the school level first, then you can see that this input process output paradigm included into the model. And you can see that also diverse student outputs were considered in this model already. So, for example, the previous achievement was one of the control variables, the intelligence, but also things like socioeconomic status, which is related to this long-term outputs. As input, teacher experience was considered per pupil expenditure and parent support. At the school level, you have a couple of diverse variables related to this school areas, like, for example, educational leadership or quality of school curricula in terms of content covered and formal structure, etc., etc. When taking a look at the classroom level, which is also part of the process, we have those different quality factors related to learning processes, like time on task, structured teaching, opportunity to learn, high expectations of pupils' progress, degree of evaluation and monitoring of pupils' progress, and reinforcement. On the context level, this model considers achievement simulations from higher administrative levels. So this is regulations on educational policy level, but not on the national, but rather from like regional regulations. Also the development of educational consumerism and co-variables such as school size, student body composition, school category, etc. When I come back to the entire model, we can see the effects that were considered here. So you see that the assumption was that the context variables influence the processes, and within the school, it was considered that the higher level of school is also influencing the classroom level. And then you see also paths from the inputs. So the assumption was that this input is influencing the process, and the process is resulting in a particular outcomes. Also, the inputs itself influenced the outputs directly. So after this model, I would like to point out what particular contribution result from the socio-ecological perspective, as this is recently a really prominent approach. So in the socio-ecological perspective, school is defined as a formalized institution within a social system. So this is the new perspective in the analysis of school. And it is based on the system theory, where social relationships are defined as interaction of the environment and the individual. And this is, for example, in the theory of living span. However, the socio-ecological perspective is going one step further, namely assuming that the environment and the individual is a system of a reciprocal influence. And the assumption is that changes of one component result in changes of the entire system. So human beings are born within a social network that has a specific structure and function, and which is embedded into a superordinated comprehensive environment. So that is the core of the socio-ecological perspective. So what does this mean for the personality development? It means that the environment is a network of separate settings, and they are called also microsystems, with distinguishable actors and spaces, for example, classmates, clique, family, etc. And the settings are characterized by specific behavior of the social players, and the individual and the setting influence each other and adapt to each other until they reach a kind of balance. The structures of these settings can be put into a hierarchical order, where the lower structures are embedded into the superordinated structures. So for the development of personality, it means that this is a lifelong process of an adaptation of the environment and the individual, kind of interactive process, iterative process. Now, the social cognitive theory comes into it, combining theories, socio-ecological theory with learning theories, and the assumption is that the individuals are not subjects to impulsive action, but they rather reflect and judge, and the human beings are able to learn and derive consequences from their own actions based on their experiences as well as on their observations. So they are able to pilot their own behavior and perception. So the assumption is not as in, for example, in the behaviorismus, that the environment is influencing the development independently from the personality of a human being, but rather that a human being is able to kind of create their own view on the reality. Another assumption is, of course, that personality is not exclusively hereditary, but it changes throughout the life and is being constructed as a result of this interaction between the individual and environment. Important personal traits and processes is, of course, this cognitive processing, which is crucial in the process of adaptation and establishment of behavioral patterns that form the personality, but also additionally emotions and motivations. And there were two major contexts in young ages which were defined and described as very crucial for personality development, and this is the family context and the school context. And in particular, concerning the school context, there was the focus on the interaction with peers in classrooms and cliques, and on the other hand, on the development of traits that are related and relevant for the school career and learning, for example, academic self-concept. One concept that was proposed within this approach was the big fish, little pond effect, which is a very well-known effect. And this basically describes the fact that when a student with a particular achievement is within a classroom, let's say with very high-achieving children, then she will feel like a little fish in a big pond. So the size of the pond marks the level of achievement within the classroom. And when taking the same student into the classroom with very weak and low achieving students, the same student would feel like a huge fish, like a very smart and brief student. So deriving from this perspective, we can differentiate three different system levels, namely the system level, the classroom level, and the student level, and of course also have a different focuses while evaluating them. So the system level is mainly concerned with the intended curriculum. So those are the regulations at the system level, and of course the evaluation is a review of national regulations, processes of implementation, etc. On the classroom level, the focus is on the implemented curriculum, which takes place in learning processes, and the evaluation would be the quality of those learning processes. At the student level, which is the lowest level, the micro level, the interest is on the achieved curriculum, and this is defined as student abilities and knowledge. And the evaluation is, of course, the testing the achievement and knowledge of students. So now I would like to show you a model that aims to summarize and to include all these different perspectives. And as you will see in a minute, this is really a huge model with a lot of assumptions. And one of the challenges of this model is, of course, its empirical application. So then this is the dynamic model of educational effectiveness, the ultimate description of the reality, which considers the system level, the primary process, which is mainly focused on the classroom, and the individual level. And as you see, each of these levels has really a couple of variables included. And we will take a look first on this middle level here on the primary process, as this is the core of the interest in school effectiveness research, namely on the quality of teaching. And you see there's a couple of different quality variables included into that, and also, of course, diverse outcomes are considered, and they are a little bit different from those in the previous model. They are described in a very wide manner: cognitive, affective, psychomotor, and new learning. So the model is a generalization of a theory, because this doesn't imply any particular pedagogical approach or a particular outcome. It's just really a very general description. At the system level, this model already includes also the national regional policy for education, evaluation of policy, which wasn't included in the previous model as well, and also the educational environment in terms of conditions in the society. Here in this box you see the school policy, evaluation of school policy. So this box would include many different organizational variables like leadership, management, everything on the school level. And the lowest level is the individual level, and this has also really a lot of different dimensions and variables included. So those are, for example, the individual personal characteristics and family background characteristics such as gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, personality traits, but also things that occur or are related to the classroom practices directly, like time on tasks. This is considered as being an individual teacher trait, because even though the teacher provides a particular time for learning, it depends very much on an individual how much time a student would spend on a task actually. But also things like expectations, thinking styles, etc., etc. So when taking a look at the entire model, you can already see a difference to the previous one, namely this reciprocal relationship between the individual level and the classroom level. So the assumption is that of this interactive relationship between those two levels, and this additional national levels included into the model. And the model is a really comprehensive and huge model, trying to describe all the theories. An interesting thing is this circle here, which, when taking a closer look, contains 5 different quality dimensions, which are recommended to be considered while evaluating school quality or school effectiveness, namely the school quality. So you see already here those 2 different terms, like the effectiveness and quality. And for example, from the perspective of school effectiveness research, quality is a prerequisite for effectiveness. When you go into the educational field and discuss with practitioners, with researchers in the field of learning, they would say no, quality is the most important factor and school effectiveness is just one nice add-on. So the perspectives on those definitions are really different. However, I mean, just to point out these 5 different dimensions, so they consider frequency, which is a quantitative factor, the quality of different factors in the school system, the level of differentiation, which is related to the heterogeneity of students, the stage of implementation, and the focus. So now I would like to spend another few minutes on this conceptualization of the evaluation, and also in relation to the term of quality. So conceptualizing the evaluation of school. So there is no way around a discussion on quality versus, and with a question mark if it's really versus effectiveness. So the critical discussions on the effectiveness approach was that it is too focused on student achievement, especially, of course, at the beginning, and that it promotes the economic perspective on learning as an opposite to this Humboldt's idea of education as a tool serving the human being to develop his inner individual self-being to become a harmonious being. So that was the Humboldt's idea of education. And the approach of school effectiveness is not, so that was the result of this discussion or the conclusion, the approach of school effectiveness is not useful for the evaluation of school quality. But let us take a look at definitions of school quality. And this is really not a very old source, and I couldn't realize that this changed much since then. So quality of the educational system is defined as the extent to which it is committed to the normative settings of the society. I mean, it is understandable that it is really very difficult and almost, I would say, not accessible to provide an ultimative quality definition in a school system. So the authors are stating that quality is described as a multifaceted and multidimensional construct. And the quality development is described as the interaction of multiple factors and processes at different levels of the system, individual, institutional, and social context. So as you see already from these definitions, this is a very wide and general approach to define the quality. But what implies this definition when trying to analyze the quality? It implies that the analysis of quality has to consider the degree to which schools are able to meet specific objectives and achieve desired levels of accomplishment. But then we can ask, what are the objectives and accomplishments, or which quality criteria can be formulated? And I would like to explore it on an example, since this is really related to those normative settings of the society. So the example is analyzing the quality of the national educational policy, for example, focusing on resources, but you could take anything else as an example. So the objective could be to provide appropriate resources to schools The accomplishment is the extent to which responsible entities on the national or local level are committed to provide appropriate learning resources. And as a researcher, you could develop a quality criterion, for example, if the resources are provided and made available. And this could contain structural and process characteristics. Of course, we have to deal with this appropriateness, and this can be defined based on the social cognitive learning theory as the capability of stimulating self-directed learning. So as you see into this very wide definition, you have to put meanings into it while choosing pedagogical approaches and defining what actually is expected from the school or from the educational policy. And this is always related to those normative settings as well. Because, I mean, even taking this approach of self-directed learning and deciding to base it on the social cognitive learning theory, it is something that we as a society define that this is important for students, for future life success and for learning. So this, we could choose anything else. Probably we could decide that something else is more important for future learning, for future life. But now, this is really everything here in it is related to those normative settings. When taking this example onto a lower level, like learning processes, we could consider daily practices of using the resources and, of course, include a couple of process characteristics. But also, of course, student outcomes, how effectively those resources are used to reach objectives related to outcomes or outputs. And also here, we can define any kind of outcomes. We can, for example, as outcome, we can define the happiness of students. This is a normative setting that we say we expect our students to achieve and perform good in literacy and mathematics mainly, basically, and then a few other things as well. So this is not so far away from the effectiveness research, I would say. So that's why I excluded this versus and question mark and put defining quality and effectiveness, because I think those terms should contribute both to school effectiveness or school quality evaluation. So to sum it up, the definition of quality implies that the analysis of quality should consider the degree to which schools are able to meet specific objectives and achieve desired levels of accomplishment, which are normative settings of the society. So in this case, I would say that quality can be conceptualized as effectiveness, because at the core, effectiveness can be described as the extent to which the desired level of outcomes is achieved, taking into account the input and process. But this definition can be applied to any level or to any stage of this input process output paradigm. Just a simple example, you can, for example, say, okay, in this input process output model, the process was the learning processes. But when you want to analyze the quality of learning processes, we can say, okay, the input are the regulations and the resources and teacher training, etc., etc. And now our output is the process itself. So this thinking in input process outputs terms can be applied to any stage of the production process, let's say. So to point out effectiveness in terms of student outcomes, so related to this last stage of this of the input process output, should not act as an exclusive quality factor, but should rather be one of the multiple dimensions of quality. So I would propose such a definition of high quality schools. They are considered as high quality when they achieve the objectives or desired levels of accomplishment for a set of criteria, including components of the input process and output. So I would say high quality school should have a high quality input, high quality process, and high quality outputs. And of course, while later on in technical terms to analyze the output, we consider also the input and process. But of course, analyzing the process, we consider also the input. So now I would like to give us a few minutes to critically rethink on the concept of evaluation of school and of learning quality in schools, namely to reflect on what is important for learning, but not only on the school level, but from a more general point of view. And to do so, I prepared some slides with 3 examples from the real world with different educational reforms that are applied on different levels, just to give us a little bit of input what is done, and just to rethink if this is promising and will be effective or improving quality. So what is important for learning? We have the school system as a multi-level system placed within a social context, right? But the question is, of course, which level context matters for life success and happiness when we say that those are important outcomes. But let's say that those are important outcomes. So is this the input on the school system? Probably the single school with its own social context, or probably the classroom context? Or is the individual more important, like teachers, students, these individual processes? Or is it the family context? Or maybe it's all together? Most probably yes. But still, what matters more? So this is an example from early childhood education, and I found it surprising that this is implemented in not only in a very small setting, but really as a bigger reform. And it is, you can find this on YouTube, on the University of California television. And this is the note that was included there, and I will read it briefly. So this is on the arts in action, dance and drama improving student achievement. And San Diego Unified School District's Visual and Performing Arts Program, in partnership with UC Irvine or whatsoever, Irvine, researched the impact of theater and dance lessons on early childhood education, and preliminary results suggest that integrating the arts into the Common Core standards may be one of the key to acquiring English language, proficiency in grades key 2. Professional teaching artists work with classroom teachers to develop lessons plans which encourage critical thinking and promote life skills. So this is a very recent goal. So they want to develop at a very early stage of development, namely in the early childhood education, so which is before the primary school, the critical thinking and life skills. And this is an example. I will just present part of it because the movie is a little bit longer. It has 20 minutes or so. I will just present a part of it to give you an idea how they work.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Now yours doesn't have to look exactly like mine, but you do have to be doing that same movement. Here we go. 7, 8, and swing.
In the fall of 2007, San Diego City Schools Visual and Performing Arts, or VAPA department, partnered with the University of California at Irvine's Center for Learning in the Arts, Sciences, and Sustainability. For many years, California public school districts have eagerly looked for strategies to improve test scores.
6, 7, mow the lawn, go 1.
The more our leaders, our educational leaders, tried to improve test scores, they found that time was of the essence. And so they started eliminating parts of the program. And we all know what happened to that. In many of our school districts, the arts took a dive real fast.
Time and tempo. Tempo tells us how fast something moves. And it does say right next to it, it says fast and slow. So we're going to be talking about fast and slow tempo and how we can move our bodies really, really fast and really slow.
Together, the organizations applied for and received a grant from the Department of Education to create special performing arts lessons connecting dance and drama to other content areas for students kindergarten through 2nd grade.
To this song, it's going to go fast and slow, and then in a little bit, I'll let you dance to it.
Slowly as clouds drift through the sky. Faster, faster, playing faster with the rubber, moving faster,
Nice, Gabriel. Good arms, Kai.
This development and dissemination education grant also examined how to help English language learners struggling to master English language acquisition.
Good, Aiden, good for you.
Brown in the fall. Faster, faster, playing faster with the rubber, moving faster.
No running, Ulysses. Freeze. Brain research shows that the brain is just very malleable at that time. It's just there's just a real high level of readiness for children to acquire not just language, but any number of skills. So introducing children to a language other than their home language in that age span is just, the conditions are most favorable.
Your life one day. How can you save my life one day? I am a big lion.
Do we do hard body or soft body?
San Diego City Schools' VAPA department created and implemented the Arts Integration Teaching Artist Project, kindergarten through 2nd grade, model development and dissemination grant curriculum. Dr. Brulette from UC Irvine led a team of evaluators who assessed student improvement. The VAPA department hired professional dance and drama teaching artists to mentor classroom teachers over a 3-year period as they developed a new set of strategies using dance and drama to teach language arts.
I mean, I could imagine that those approaches deliver really nice results in the early childhood education. However, those children appears older to me. I don't know, at least at the first video. So they obviously also use mixed groups in terms of age mixed. And when taking a look on these different approaches that they implement here, it reminds me, I don't know about you, but it reminds me about on this teaching methods of the native nations in, let's say, South Africa or wherever, where the teachers are really moving and presenting how, for example, an animal is making noises and moving, etc. I don't know if they have any results on older children. This remains, of course, a question for evaluation. Another example that I have brought here with me is from a very different level of education, namely from high school education, and those are some informations on the teacher first, before I show you the movie, which methods are applied. So this is Catherine Mason, and she has a PhD in education and is working at the University of California, where she is an assistant professor at this department, and those are her research interests. So she's a methodologist concerned with very complex modeling, like latent variable growth models, finite mixture models, etc., etc. So as I saw this, because I was researching this before I attended her workshop, so I wanted to know a little bit about the trainer, and then I figured out this movie.
This is the story all about how your life got turned upside down, so I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. I'll
Start taking out loans just to get your turn. At Harvard University you came to learn. Courses and papers, getting theories. Lincoln, your friends say to you?
Holmes, what were you thinking?
Well, so I like to have a little fun with statistics. People tend to be, one of the things that's challenging about an introductory stat class is that some people come in with some anxiety. So I try to just have a little fun with it, not take myself too seriously, make the class a little bit more relaxed.
Got no direction, I need direction. Just got my
material can, although I love it, it can get a little dry. And that's okay. So I'm trying to make it interesting. So I have what I call stattertainment.
Hello. I'm an S40 student.
That is nice. What is an S40 student?
It is a student at Harvard University's Graduate School of Education.
I want to be a student at Harvard University's Graduate School of Education. I want to be an S40 student.
So the stattertainment is, I'll show, it's not every class, but every few classes I'll show something that's available on the web. Pop song inspired descriptive statistical graphs and people who have done stat raps. And so I'll show that and I'll find material that is related to what I'm actually talking about in class that day.
So please, RFD, check on those assumptions of Homo sapiens. My SAS code, it won't look.
Then I offer an extra credit at the end of the semester where the students can create their own form of stattertainment.
Two-tailed and not a one-tailed, and getting native with data before running this data while they stay in the lab before running regression. Check the distribution and your scatter plot giving the association. Give me your strength and direction, your pairwise correlation. It's a freaking weekend, baby, and there's data to run.
So some of the really great ones. One was a video that actually covered almost the entire content of the class, set to the New York state of mind.
We now proceed confidently, cruising down Brattle Street, right onto Appian, driving so fast cause we can't be late for stats again. Come out of higher ed, home of the other Judy. Now we live on 3rd floor, doing stats for S30. Say what up to Mingta, he's such a fly guy, but only 15 minutes ain't enough to satisfy. Mason, we'd be wigged out, Jones, we're about to cry. Tell by our attitude that we're most definitely from
S30.
Katy Perry, California Girls, and they rewrote it as Statistician Girls. When they're able to take it and repackage it in this sort of more creative expression, I feel like they own that content more than, I mean, they have to do a final project too, but the learning is almost more evident to me in some of these projects, and that they're actually sort of have found some joy in the topic.
Once you study with us, you'll be falling in love with statistician girls. We check the stuff.
So as I found this movie, I was amazed because I never have heard about such methods at the university. As you probably have noticed, she said that she assumes that when students are able to express those statistical things in own words, they kind of own the topic. So that is her approach, and he's apparently being successful with that because she's saying that she really can see the learning process. So another example is from the family context, and this is something that I see a little bit more critical probably. So there's an initiative called the 30 Million Words Initiative, as an innovative parental-directed program designed to harness the power of parents' language to build a child's brain and impact his or her future. It's based on the research also related to social inequalities. So they have shown that children from advantaged family backgrounds has the benefit of being able to learn or to hear 30 million words before they attend the school. So the aim is really to reach the children from disadvantaged family backgrounds. How does it work? The curriculum combines education and technology in a multimedia platform. And the educational component transforms hard science into accessible and easy to understand concepts. So they use animation and illustrate the concepts. They provide a video to parents and showing a parental-child interaction, how to bring the concepts to full circle and to show parents how to apply them in a real life. And they also share feedback in a quantitative manner with parents to motivate and track personal goals. So it is a kind of education that is applied via software to parents to train them, to teach them how to interact effectively with a child in order to be able to improve his abilities. And what I was thinking when I looked at that is that I could imagine that if there is no special initiative to reach children from disadvantaged family backgrounds, I mean, who would take effort, search for such a software, be able to implement it at home and really take the time to look at movies, learn and really improve their own ways of action? I would guess not preferably children or families from disadvantaged backgrounds. So I don't know if they really are reaching their goals. However, I wanted to show you a video from a movie with kind of testimonies. So the parents are explaining what happened after they started to apply the video.
When the TMW project started, it gave me a boost of confidence. Even though I wasn't so good in school, it gave me a boost of confidence of teaching her the things that I did know and do know.
I found the 30 Million Words Project to be life-changing. Me and my daughter are still using the methods that we've learned doing the project. It's like it's natural, it's become a part of our lives.
The world is open to my grandchildren now because they are empowered with words.
That's the purple part, yes, and it's beautiful. Look at the detail.
30 million words. It's how many fewer words a child born into poverty hears by age 3 compared to a child born into more affluent circumstances. It's the disparity in early language environments of children, one that has a profound impact on their IQ, school performance, and future. It's the gap that is a prime target in our effort to lessen the effect of poverty on a child's life.
At the University of Chicago, we're working to close this gap with the 30 Million Words Project. 30 Million Words is a program which really harnesses the power of parent language as a catalyst for child success. We use a novel parent-directed curriculum that incorporates education, behavior change, and cutting-edge technology for children 0 to 3. Why start so early? For children born into poverty, disparities can be seen even before their first birthday. At 9 months, babies from poor homes score lower on measures of cognitive development than their high SES counterparts. By 24 months, the size of this gap more than triples. Preparing our children for success in school and in life starts at home during the first 3 years.
I did not know that that your child's learning process starts now, 0 to 3 years. I always thought it started at 5 once they start school.
Look, the stars. The stars are supposed to be in the sky. They're not supposed to be on the ground, are they?
Sharan is not alone in her thinking. While research clearly supports the importance of early childhood education, society has failed to act. Neuroscience tells us that 85% of a child's brain develops in the first 3 years of life, but only 5% of public investments in children happen during this time. We're paying for failure instead of investing in success, and disadvantaged children are paying the price. Our goal at the 30 Million Words Project is to work towards reversing this trend. At the core of our mission is the belief that every parent has the ability to grow their child's brain and impact their future. Where does this power come from? Their words.
I
didn't really think that talk was very important when it came to kids.
I mean, this is a really great initiative, and if reaching the disadvantaged families, this is really a good initiative, and it's unique in a particular sense because there's not so much initiatives towards improving parental skills. At least I didn't notice so much of them. But now I would like to present to you empirical example from my own studies and focusing back again on the school system, concerning or focusing on the school management and leadership while taking into account also those different levels of the system. So this is an empirical example from a study on school management and leadership in the light of global social changes, and it focuses on promotion of reading literacy skills in schools. And it is an example of 3 European countries. And the study was implemented by myself and my colleagues, Plamen Mirażynski and Diana Deza, and it was presented in January this year in Jakarta. So first of all, I would give you some research background and very short input on the theoretical approaches since we know already everything about school effectiveness research. And then I would explain to you the data sources, variables, and the analysis method and present to you some results and also discuss the interpretation and the policy implications of the study. There are, of course, some research limitations and further recommendations at the end. So the research background and the theoretical approach. So we have to deal with changes of life conditions that are related, for example, to growing mobility, technological developments, flow of information, or unstable world market. As a result, there is the growing necessity for individuals to develop appropriate skills for successful participation in the society. So literacy is one of the 8 key competences required for successful participation in modern society, and this is defined by the EU Commission. And according to the high-level group of experts on literacy report Act Now, reading and writing skills are becoming increasingly important. So, for example, for employment and social and civic participation, as they are centered around the written world, but also to overcome poverty and face challenges resulting from growing mobility, such as multilingualism and cultural heterogeneity. Of course, those developments implies urgency to ensure that Europeans acquire literacy skills from early age. Still, research findings show that literacy persists, and according to this high-level group, policy action needs to be set in place. And they propose raising awareness about literacy, finding solutions to foster sustained commitment, cooperative approaches involving cross-target audiences like children, adolescents, and adults, to implement effective literacy strategies by setting and committing to a long-term goal. So those recommendations are kind of mobilizing all the society to focus on development of leading literacy. But still, as a educational researcher, we would ask what can schools do to contribute to improving reading achievement. And this is the focus of our study. We have concentrated on early literacy skills because they have been found to be very important for development of children and for further learning. They develop at an early stage of schooling or even before schooling. They promote learning and overall outcomes of education in early grades, and they have positive influence on later educational outcomes and provide the fundamentals for later academic success. And they also prevent learning difficulties and language impairments. Especially reading literacy is a prerequisite for further literacy skills, such as writing. But also for developing the ability of generalization of universal premises, which is important for learning in general. On the other hand, early difficulties in literacy may hinder the transition from learning to read to reading to learn, and this is taking place around the 4th year of schooling. And also it may affect students' achievement development in other subjects. Then there are also some research findings on which factors, school factors, are associated with reading achievement of students. And on the school level, it has been found that school management, cooperation and coordination, personal policy and development are very important factors. On the classroom level, especially cognitive activating methods, time on task, cooperative learning and feedback has been found as important factors. Another set of variables that were influential on student outcomes is the student composition in terms of the family background of students, but also their achievement level. And it has been stated that it is important for learning outcomes. It is also correlated, of course, with school factors, and it is and its impact on outcomes differs between different groups of students. An example for the last statement could be, for example, when you imagine a student with low skills attending a school with higher skills, this student will most probably benefit more from this comprehensive and sophisticated learning environment than a student from a higher family background, because they already have so much input at home, so they don't need so much support at school. So the question is, what can schools do to improve reading achievement? And we analyzed mainly 3 research questions. The first research question is if reading achievement in schools is associated with school management, resources for reading, and high quality instruction. So we took some variables from the school level, and we have just, in this case, just one variable from the classroom level, from the learning process, and this is due to the data structure and to the available variables that were available in the study. So there was this variable or the scale on motivation to read conveyed by teachers. So that was a scale analyzing how much a teacher is activating and motivating students reading. The second research question was, how is the cultural capital of the students in schools related to reading achievement? And the third question was, how are individual preschool literacy skills related to reading achievement in 4th grade? We used as a frame the dynamic model of educational effectiveness, but we didn't apply the entire model. We tried to consider as much as possible from this model, but of course it is not possible or very challenging to include everything. So the factors that were included at the individual level are student characteristics, and I will show in a minute which ones, but also the family background. Then at the school level, we included school management, instruction, and student composition. Data sources and analysis method, we used the PIRLS 2011 data. We analyzed 3 European countries with different performance in reading achievement, and this is Denmark, Germany, and France. I know that taking into account the entire range of achievement in PIRLS, this is not so much difference between those countries. However, the differences are significant, and our aim was to take 3 countries that are more or less similar in terms of sociocultural background and conditions, and then to pick such countries where we can find as big achievement differences as possible. And this is some data on the countries, and as you see, the HDI, which is the Human Development Index, is kind of similar in these countries. A few words about the systems. To be able to interpret the results in an appropriate manner, we have to consider, of course, the systems. And the case of Germany is probably a specific one, because there is a huge demographic, cultural, and social heterogeneity of the federal states. Also, another special case is that we have about 30% of children ages 5 to 15 who are students with migration backgrounds, and the educational system is highly decentralized. So that means that the education ministries of the federal states are responsible for all the most important regulations of curricula, timetables, etc., etc. And only some crucial aspects are standardized through treaties between federal states. In France, there is a very long tradition on a centralized national curricula. So the Ministry of Education is responsible for setting curricula, awarding national diplomas, personal recruitment and development. And the municipalities are responsible for the implementation and for practical things related to running schools, management of non-teaching staff, etc. In Denmark, the school system is also centrally regulated. Local schools have partial autonomy, however, the municipalities are free to provide a common plan, and this is really a common practice. So both systems, France and Denmark, are much more centrally regulated in comparison to Germany. In all three countries, schooling is compulsory from the age of 6 or 7 to the age of 16. Primary education takes place in comprehensive schools. Most students are enrolled in state schools, which are free of charge. And the official language of instruction is the respected language of the country. So those are very important characteristics of the system, and we were happy that they are so similar in those countries, because we wanted to have at least a little bit more similar systems to be compared, to analyze the mechanisms. Those are the scales that we included into the model. The scales at the individual level, that was the preschool reading literacy skills, motivation to read, academic reading self-concept, cultural capital, which was a simple modeling using just a number of books and children books at home. I mean, this is related, this is one of the limitations. I will explore it later on. At the school level, we included student composition of the school, teachers' motivation to read, shortages of resources for reading, school emphasis on academic success, and school emphasis on strategies for reading. So the method is a very interesting method, and I would say a recommendable one. And recently I was applying this method with really like 10 or 15 countries already, and it works well. So this method tries or aims to correspond to theoretical developments, namely that describe learning in schools as an interaction of students' individual and family characteristics with class and school factors. Of course, interaction can be only tested in longitudinal studies, but at least with this multi-group, multi-level structural equation modeling, we can at least have those diverse levels and those different factors included. And we can take into account the cultural, political, and socio-geographical circumstances of the area in which the school is located. Of course, this depends on the variables available in the study. But I mean, in general, the method would allow for that. The methodological handling is still challenging. So what is the benefit of taking this approach? One of the benefits is the multi-level analysis, which allows for direct modeling of the effects on different levels according to the data structure. Then the structural equation part in it is a tool that allows for latent modeling of sociological and psychological phenomena, which is a more comprehensive measurement instrument. And this allows also for a joint modeling, providing indices for model goodness of fit. Multi-group analysis, on the other hand, permits a cross-country comparison within a joint model, yet the results are given for each country separately. So what happens with this method is that this multi-level structural equation model is applied in one simultaneous analysis for all the participating country. So you would get a huge output with different results for each country, but with fit indices for the overall model and also with fit indices for every country. And in this analysis, it is possible to keep the measurement part of the model constant, whereas you can relax the structural part. So the tool is that constructing the psychological or sociological constructs, we can force the software to fix the factor loadings so that the psychological constructs are the same for every analyzed country, whereas we can relax the associations on the structural level so we can test different mechanisms, but always using kind of the same instrument. So the results, this is just a table with the sample sizes, with the number of schools, and with the average sample size sample size within schools. And with the ICC, the ICC is a prerequisite or a preliminary analysis before applying multi-level models. And from this analysis, we can state that in each educational system of the countries, there is some variation on the school level. So the aim was to check if the schools differ from each other at all, because if not, then we cannot analyze any different mechanisms, right? So with this analysis, we gained the result that in every country we have a little bit of achievement differences. They are on the school level, and in this case, this can be interpreted as 12% of the overall variance is at the school level, 16 and 31%. So you see that Germany is the most diverse system in terms of differences between schools in achievement. This is the whole model. We are not going to interpret all the numbers, as they are also not on our research focus. Just to understand the model, this is the individual level, and you would find those individual variables here: preschool reading literacy skills, motivation for reading, academic reading, self-concept, cultural capital of the family, and this is just a control variable. You can ignore it. At the school level, you will find those school level factors that we included into the model, and our research focus in this analysis is on that level. We have a lot of variables in the model, and of course a lot of variance. So with a very cautious way, I also try to interpret those correlations that are at the level of 10% error probability. So you see emphasis on reading strategies is not significant in Denmark and France. However, it's significantly negative in Germany, which is not what I was expected to get. I will try to interpret it in a minute. Then shortages of resources is not significant in Denmark and Germany, and it's significant and very low in France, and the significance level is also very low, so it should be interpreted with caution. Teacher instruction is, I would say, consistent within 3 countries, which is consistent also with the assumptions and expectations. Then we have the emphasis on academic success, which is not significant in Germany. It's negatively associated in Denmark and positive in France. And the last factor on the school level is the school cultural capital, which is related to student composition. And as you see here, the effect is really high, I would say middle to high. On the individual level, another variable that was on our interest is the preschool reading literacy skills. And as you see, they differ between the countries. So in Denmark and France, they are 0.20. In Germany, the coefficient is so low that we can ignore it almost. Okay, what are the interpretations and policy recommendations from these results? So first of all, there was this research questions on the school level. We have management and reading resources. And the question was if they contribute to improving reading achievement. Yes, but the effects are weak and inconsistent across countries. And the interpretation is that most probably other country-specific conditions interact with school effectiveness factors that were included into the model. And the policy recommendation would be that action taken in order to evaluate and improve school effectiveness in each country must address the particular needs of its educational system. I mean, this is something very general, but this result supports this point of view that when trying to increase reading achievement while implementing reforms on management, they have to be very specific for different countries. Probably one explanation why we put such things into articles is that politicians always try to find like overall patterns, the school effectiveness factors for the world. And this is, I mean, we as researchers and also whoever is concerned with theoretical developments of learning could guess that those factors might not be the same in all the countries. However, it's still important to provide empirical evidence, obviously. Then there were the teacher instruction, which motivates reading, is associated with reading achievement. So this is one of the school factors, or this is a factor related more to the process itself, which is consistent in these three countries. The effect is weak, however consistent and significant, and then the interpretation is that interesting and attractive instruction has a positive effect on achievement, and this effect is independent from other school and class factors, obviously. So it's really an effect that occurs in those different systems. The variable is negatively associated with school cultural capital, and the interpretation could be that in socially disadvantaged schools, teachers have to attract students to reading more than in socially advantaged schools, and the policy recommendation would be that policy undertaken to improve achievement should concentrate, among others, on teachers' education in order to enable teachers for a higher quality instruction. So those recommendations are really on a system level, right? Student composition is also associated with achievement, and the association is moderate to strong and consistent in all three countries. And the interpretation is that the accumulated cultural capital has a positive effect on reading achievement. And the policy recommendation is that particularly school systems with distinct implicit or explicit tracking should concentrate on accumulating for the inequality mechanisms and put special attention to schools with students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Because, of course, when we consider this association, the result or the conclusion is that students attending schools with lower cultural, socioeconomic capital are on the lost position, let's say. So educational policy should try at least to accumulate for this effect. As implied by the findings on instruction, reforms to improve for instance, teaching quality could be undertaken, especially in those disadvantaged schools, as we found that this has a positive effect. Then there's this third branch of research questions on the individual preschool reading literacy skills, if they are associated with reading achievement and other psychological learning conditions, and we see that the effects are weak. And our interpretation was that other individual or school classroom factors interact with preschool literacy skills. For example, the school managed to catch up the weak students, so that could be the assumption. In the German school system, I think that this association disappears because we control including the school level, all the differences between children are already in this variance between schools. So that's why on the individual level we don't find any effects anymore. Evaluation of such reforms requires assessments before entering the schools, because when we want to learn how much a school is contributing to improving this early literacy skills, we have to assess children before schooling and then after 1 to 3 years of schooling. Also the study limitations and recommendations for further research. So study limitations are very typical limitations of cross-sectional large-scale studies, related to challenges for testing causal relationships, what I mentioned several times during the presentation. We would need a longitudinal study. So with cross-sectional study, we just have the correlational associations, which are kind of preliminary results. Further limitations of the study and design and methods are on weighting, on cross-country comparisons, on 2 levels versus 3 levels models, which is related to the fact that in the school system we have at least those 3 levels, like this, within a school even we have 3 levels already, school, class and student. With our studies, with the IEA studies, we cannot analyze those 3 levels separately due to the study design. So what was done in this study, we applied just a 2-level model. And everything that was on the, related to the processes within the classroom was analyzed on the school level. So this is a kind of limitation. Then we have the limitations of cross-country and cross-level invariance testing. It is very well known, or in recent discussion in large-scale assessment studies, there is this topic on how much are these constructs comparable between different cultures. And this is something that has to be tested. There are methodological applications how to test scale invariance across groups, but also across levels. So we have to make sure that our construct that we applied on level 1 is also the same as between schools. So when applying, for example, the motivation, let's say, we would like to test the motivation of individuals, but then we also want to check if there is like a kind of motivational, climate in the school. So like to check for the school climate, if this is really motivating towards learning. How are the attitudes of students? So those are kind of the same thing, but on different levels, and they have a different meaning. We could theoretically take the individual variables, aggregate them to the school level, and say, okay, this is my indicator for the climate. But then we have really to make sure that those variables mean the same for the individuals as well on the school level. There's also the discussion on the categorical versus linear approaches, because the variables that we are using in large-scale assessment studies are most often categorically and should be modeled as such, but they are modeled with linear approaches, and this has, of course, some methodological hinderings, and also on the random slopes modeling, but I will not explore this in depth. Further recommendations are that more classroom factors should be included. That is related to this comprehensive modeling, so I was kind of unsatisfied that we just had one instructional quality variable. I guess if we would have more, we would also be able to explain more of the variance of the dependent variable. Then another recommendation would be to explore the relationships between school level and other psychological learning conditions, because in the model we included not so many individual psychological conditions, but it is important, of course, for learning outcomes, the motivation of students, the academic self-concept, etc. Then another recommendation is to test the cross-national invariance of school factors. We did the testing only for the individual factors, so another thing that could be implemented should be the testing of this cross-national invariance of the school factors, and also to improve the methodological part of the study. For example, using a more sophisticated methods, which are mixture modeling or methods on causal inference. Concluding the entire presentation, the discussion on quality did not provide a common definition, as the system is too complex with various levels, factors, heterogeneous audiences. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, school effectiveness research developed towards a more comprehensive approach of effectiveness. And at the end, high quality input and process is a precondition for effectiveness. And effectiveness is one of the most important and socially driven criteria of school quality. And we see also that methodological developments allow for complex modeling. And still, school effects are not very strong in empirical studies. The family context and compositional effects are at least as much important as the school context and teaching methods. So this is kind of coming back to Kuhlmann's study, saying, okay, we know that school matters, which is fine, but the remaining question is, how much does school matter? At the very end, to conclude, I put another probably example. If we probably should rethink our conception of teaching completely after all. And there's a movie that will be, I guess, also translated into Polish. I brought just a trailer. I found this movie very interesting.
We do have this extraordinary power. I mean the power of imagination. Every feature of human culture is the consequence of this unique capacity. But I believe that we systematically destroy this capacity in our children.
我们经常把我们的儿童比喻为是一个被家长和被学校牵着的风筝啊。
Weil wir denken, dass der Wettbewerb so wichtig ist, fangen wir an, unsere Kinder immer früher auf diese Konkurrenzwelt vorzubereiten. Und eigentlich müsste es andersrum sein.
Wenn Sie in die Zukunft gucken, wie wird dann Ihr idealer Top-Manager aussehen?
Leistungsorientiert. Alles andere ist egal.
Egal wie.
Egal wie.
Egal wie. Mhm.
Die Verkürzung des Lebens auf die Ökonomie ist eine der schlimmsten Entwicklungen unserer heutigen Zeit.
Jeder weiß, dass die Schule nicht das Leben ist. Mein Leben aber ist die Schule, was heißt, dass da etwas falsch gelaufen sein muss.
Was weiß denn die Schule von den wahren Bedürfnissen der Kinder? Das Schulprogramm geht von dem Konzept der Erwachsenen aus und da soll man Kinder hineinschwingen in diese Form.
Ce qu'on doit à l'enfant, on lui doit le bonheur.
赢在起点，输在终点。
Jedes Kind hat andere Eigenschaften und die bringt es mit auf die Welt. Und deshalb ist jedes Kind eigentlich hochbegabt. Fertig.
But to be honest, this is the reason why I choose to study, not to become a teacher. I mean, in Germany, the school system is, the higher educational system is structured in such a way that you can choose at the beginning of the study if you want to study to become a teacher, and then you get subjects, etc., additionally to education. Or you can also decide to study just education, a very wide research field, educational field. And for the beginning, I wanted to become a teacher, but then I was so frustrated with the system, so that I decided not to become a teacher, because I thought, okay, then I would have a very limited resources to do something, to influence the system at all, or at least to criticize it, yeah. And so that was, yeah, I mean, as a researcher, what can we do? Yeah, I mean, we are not politicians, but at the end, I decided to study education. And that was my motivation, because I had the feeling that this entire system is completely failing what it aims. So that was my unexplored, individual, subjective point of view as a very young adult. I ended up with school effectiveness research, with quantitative studies. It's kind of contradicting this aim, I would say. But on the other hand, we need also critical voices within those research branches. So we need also somebody who knows about the methods, about the theoretical approaches, but then has this critical point of view. And we very often have the case that researchers from particular traditions are not so much open to discussions with researchers from other traditions. And this is really important to have this wide-minded and wide understanding of the topics. And I think we need really those openness to different and diverse meanings. So I'm applying the quantitative studies, quantitative research, analyzing school effectiveness. However, I still think that qualitative analysis are very important, as they really reveal those diverse things and mechanisms. So putting everything into one overall model is nice for educational policy makers. But as practitioners, as educationalists, we want to know what happens in lessons. So I really can understand this point of view, and I like to discuss with people who are from qualitative traditions, because they have a completely different understanding, and also an understanding on what are the needs of individual children, and on this diversity and heterogeneity. Okay, so thank you very much. It was a pleasure for me, and see you probably somewhere in the future.